Welcome to the channel. In today's video, we're going to focus on the topic of skill-based matchmaking and how it's currently pretty strong within Modern Warfare, and it is only going to get worse before it ever gets better. In case you guys missed it, Drift0r and TheXclusiveAce, two longtime members of the Call of Duty community, did some testing of their own independently. Then they came together to share the results, and they both pretty much landed on the same four conclusions about matchmaking within Modern Warfare. The first conclusion was that ping is key. Regardless of the accounts they tested, they pretty much always had around the same ping, meaning that the game prioritizes that in the matchmaking process. And even though they are both pretty confident about their results, I think it's a little bit inconclusive since the player base for the game is so large. They can still matchmake you against other people of like skill. So even though I trust the result, I think to say it definitively, you'd have to do the exact same test 10 months from now when the player base is significantly smaller and see how well the game does at prioritizing that ping when there's not as many players. So besides that, that was still a pretty solid result to know that your connection is prioritized. The second conclusion they had was that high stat players do not match directly with other high stat players. And what I mean by that is if you have an overall KD of 4, it doesn't mean that you're going to be in a lobby full of 12 players that all have a 4 KD. Or if you're in the 10v10 playlist, you're not going to play with 20 players that all have a 4 KD. And I think this is actually a good thing because I wouldn't want to play the game knowing that I'm basically playing ranked game mode within the casual playlist, which I'm going to go ahead and touch on why I think that is probably one of the worst things you can do in terms of matchmaking. But we'll get to that a little bit later on in the video. So the third conclusion they arrived at was that there is some kind of matching going on based off your recent performance, as well as your current rank within the game. And that's the part which I think is going to end up making the game a lot worse before it actually gets better in terms of matchmaking, because once the secret's out on how to make it so that you could drop into a lower bracket, which was basically shown off in both of their videos, there's going to be people out there exploiting the matchmaking system, especially when you combine that with the fourth conclusion that there is some kind of hidden ELO MMR system. And basically, if you're unfamiliar with that, the game gives you a hidden score behind the scenes, which is normally evident in a ranked playlist. You kind of move up, you know that your ELO is improving, and you're going to be placed with players of similar ELO. In this particular game, that number is completely hidden. It could include all kinds of various information. It could completely ignore your score per minute and maybe prioritize accuracy. We don't really know what that particular algorithm is, but as more and more people experiment with it, it is only going to get abused. And I know generally there's this stigma that this is something that YouTubers do to take advantage of so they can get easier lobbies, so they can get easier gameplays. But in my opinion, that's never ever been necessary within Call of Duty, because if you're a good player, typically what will happen is in a lobby of 12 players, there's probably like 1 or 2 good players in the entire lobby besides you. Then the bulk of the remaining players are just average players. And then there's maybe 1 or 2 really bad players that maybe just got the game or newer to Call of Duty and haven't quite learned all the nuances to actually be a good player. And they'll probably improve over time. And then once the lobby has all 12 players, then they go ahead and try and do a draft in a sense where basically they take the best player, throw them on the left team, the next best player, throw them on the right. And they just continue to go back and forth trying to balance the lobby. And over the past 2 years of making Call of Duty content, I've literally showed that off hundreds of times. And I've even done a few dedicated videos explaining how to get easier lobbies within Call of Duty. Because normally what would happen is I know that I'm going into a lobby, there's probably 1 or 2 good people on the enemy team, and then everyone else is average or below average, which is not really a worry for me, because if I'm above average player, I don't really need to worry about those players. Maybe they're going to kill me once or twice. Not a huge issue. The ones I really need to worry about are the exact same skilled or like skilled players, and the best tip to get rid of those players is to go on a streak very early on. So maybe you play a little bit passive, you get your streaks, you call them in as fast as possible, and then those top tier or quote unquote good players end up leaving the match because they're kind of frustrated. Maybe they've only died once or twice, but then the enemy team has full streaks. And based off how overall player populations work, you're more likely to have someone fill that spot that is an average or below average player than an actual good one. And because of that, when the lobby actually stays intact, when you're going into that next match, you can already start off playing pretty aggressive in the beginning because you've already got a good feel of the enemy player's skill level. And of course that's easier said than done, because obviously you still got to have the skill to get those streaks in that first match that make the actual good players leave. to get the lobby that is a little bit easier, but that's a whole other topic. And obviously there's a portion of the community that is actually for strong skill-based matchmaking. They only want to be paired with like skilled players, and that could just be their general belief, or maybe they've seen it done within other video games. But Call of Duty has always been an arcade twitch shooter designed for casual play. That's why when you actually look at the professional or competitive rule set, it's basically like they're playing an entirely different game. There's so many rules that are banning certain items, and then on top of that, they have gentlemen's agreements that ban even more items to make the game as balanced as possible. One example of this is a gentleman's agreement for the weapons to not be mounted. They're not allowed to mount the weapons in competitive play just because that's an item that lowers the skill cap. They're not allowed to use shotguns, LMGs, claymores. A lot of these items that you see in a public match, like 90% of the time, they're just not allowed to use. So if COD was actually designed with those specific rule sets, it might make more sense to rank you in a ranked playlist, even if it's behind the scenes in a casual playlist. So one of the biggest things to keep in mind that we always are going to go back to on the channel is Joe Secott, one of the main developers on the game, is quoted saying that they basically designed the game to appeal to lower skilled players, and they've basically gone out of their way to lower the skill gap as much as possible within this Call of Duty than they have ever done in any Call of Duty pretty much ever. So some of the issues I have with strong skill-based matchmaking is it doesn't allow me as a player to have a casual experience. Literally, I have to run the best class setup every single match. I don't have any days off, I don't have any matches off, I don't have any exceptions, and pretty much the lobby will differ depending on how much people camped in the previous matches based off what that data was telling us. If people are camping really hard for 5 consecutive matches, their stats will actually jump up, and then they're going to be thrown into a higher bracket. And if somebody decides to actually run around, maybe they're going to end up in a lower bracket, and the combination of actually moving and getting a high KD are going to throw them into different brackets, and you're going to be paired with like skilled players, or at least in the recent matches. It's a little bit hard to figure out what exactly you're being matchmade on, like I talked about earlier, because the data on that ELO or MMR are completely hidden. And this was never more evident than when I actually jumped into a match, a 6v6 and a 10v10. You basically have no chance. Pretty much everyone in my lobbies are using the same 4 or 5 weapons, and they're all gold, and a lot of them are actually using overkills so they can combine the M4 and the 725, which recently got nerfed, but I'm still seeing it in those lobbies, so it just isn't fun. Pretty much everyone is using the top tier, top of the line, not experimenting, not having any kind of variety in the gameplay, and that makes it so it's kind of boring to play. And that's why you're seeing a lot of YouTubers, even including myself, posting a lot of groundwork gameplay. And that's because it actually feels like the matchmaking is normal in that playlist. Obviously there's 32 versus 32, so you're going to get a wider spectrum. But when you play that game mode, I can run around with the Deagle and I can go on a 17 streak, which is basically impossible in 6v6 or 10v10 unless I've reverse boosted my past 5 matches, or I just camp to go like 5-2. But I have too much integrity to do that type of nonsense, which you're going to see people do that. I'm sure people are doing that right now to get their gameplays. They go into a 6v6 and you're like, man, where the heck do they get these good lobbies? And I know there's a lot of people out there that just don't like YouTubers, are going to say YouTubers are the problem. But if you looked on Reddit recently, there was someone who posted that they actually reverse boosted for 11 hours. They had a 0.02 KD and lower than a 75 score per minute. Pretty much what they're doing is they jump on that account, they go ahead and play around so they could just stomp on those lobbies. And that's obviously an extreme. They're being put into a protected bracket, which is pretty much a part of all Call of Duties, and it's primarily to protect players that are disabled, or maybe that have never played a first-person shooter. I know there's some people that if I handed the controller to, they could not hit somebody standing still for a good minute, so maybe that bracket is best for them. But for an able-bodied player who is probably like a 2 or a 3 KD to be in that lobby, it's just completely broken. That's not fair. And the other big issue, at least in my perspective, is I enjoy making content that is designed to help players improve, because before in Call of Duty, I was an average to below average player, and over time through watching videos and actually applying what I learned, and even got to the point where I started making my own tip videos. And what's unfortunate, and the tips in this game aren't practical because we're essentially playing a different game. If you're lower skilled players, your lobbies are completely different than mine, so the tactics that would work in mine won't necessarily work in yours, and vice versa. Besides the obvious universal tactic of camping, never moving, posting up with claymores, but that's not really a fun tactic to talk about in every single video. And people are going to be experimenting with this going forward now that Drift0r and TheXclusiveAce put out some pretty concrete details on what you need to do to actually get the easier lobbies and how the lobbies are separated. Obviously unintentionally, it's just going to be abused by the community. People are going to look at that and say, you know what, I'm going to tank the next 5 matches, so it puts me in that lower bracket, and I'm just going to stomp on those noobs so bad. They haven't been in any of my lobbies, but I'm going to get my payback. I'm going to jump into the lobby, I'm going to put on the highest streaks, I'm just going to run around, these guys can't shoot, and then I'm going to be able to take them out with consistency. And that is a huge problem, and that's what I'm talking about. The lobbies are only going to get worse before they get better, and the only way they're going to get better is if they actually tone down that skill-based matchmaking, potentially add a ranked playlist, and probably one of the last things is to allow the lobby to stay intact. And the reason for that is because if I'm going into a match and I know that there's a couple sweatier players on the enemy team that are actually some high-skilled players, then I know, okay, let me go ahead and put on a better class setup so I can just go ahead and be a little bit more competitive. And then once I know, hey, you know what, this is a little bit easier lobby, let me try experimenting with the weapon I haven't really used. So unfortunately, until then, I'm pretty much forced to play ground war. Hopefully you guys understand that, enjoyed the video, and found something helpful within it. If you did, please do me a favor of hitting that like button. If you're brand new to the channel or not currently subscribed, go ahead and consider hitting the subscribe button so you'll be able to find your way back for more Call of Duty content. Appreciate all the support on the channel. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.